What's happening, everybody?
I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all.
In-Tents
All the
Genetix.
followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.
The first thing you wind up having to do is germinate a seed. Can you tell us about the germination process?
Absolutely. So once you got your tent all set up, you got your whole thing, you're getting excited, you're like, all right, man, here we go. Um, so really your options for getting a seed can be from anywhere. It can be from something you've gotten in the past through some medical flowers you've gotten from somebody, or wherever it may be.
It could be from
I
the In-Tents Genetix Growers Community Facebook page giveaway weekly. It could be from there.
it could totally be from there. And if you were one of the lucky winners, congratulations to you. That's awesome. But they could be from anywhere. They could be from anywhere. I really like getting random gifts from people, and who knows what they are, and those that's the most fun for me. I like to surprise, I like to hunt, I like to see what's there. and and that's really what it is for me. So I will take the seeds, and I get a shot glass, clean shot glass. You can use plastic, glass, whatever you want. And I use some of the RO water, so I use the filtered water. I fill it up about halfway, and then I pretty much just toss the seeds right in. I give them a nice soak for about 16 to 18 hours, somewhere in that range. You really don't want to let them go too long. And after the first few hours of them being in the water, just they'll float. They should float at first. If they sink right away, that means there's some kind of break in the shell of the seed. So they shouldn't sink right away. That means that seed might be a dud, right? So you drop your seeds in the water, and then I let them sit for about 2 hours. Then I'll go in there and I'll give them a little poke, and I'll just poke them down, and then they'll sink all the way to the bottom. That way I know they've started to absorb the water, right? And then I'll let them sit for about another, up to that 16-hour mark. And then I pretty much should be able to see them starting to crack open, and a tail should be starting to emerge. And even if there isn't a tail or it hasn't cracked, it still has started the germination process of of taking in the water and starting to grow. So usually you want to leave the shot glass in a location that's going to be dark and warm to start the process. Usually a high up cabinet in your kitchen, maybe above your refrigerator or above your stove or oven, because the refrigerator has heat coming off of it and will kind of warm up the cabinets above it to create this nice dark warm box for germinating. So I'll keep them up there, and that's kind of where I like to put them. I mean, you can put them anywhere as long as you can put them above your tent in the room. As long as it's dark and warm, that's all they really need. And then the bit of water to get them going. And then once they've cracked, then I like to take a solo cup, fill it with a clear solo cup, so that you can easily check the roots throughout the process of it being a seedling. And and then that way you kind of can get a better idea when to transplant instead of guessing. But
Oh, that's very smart. I never
so
thought of that.
so clear solo cup inside of a regular solo cup, and then you want to get your soil ready. You can use a basic soil or something that isn't too hot. You don't really want soil that's fully amended. You could totally use it, and it might work okay, but you also might run into problems. So something like a Happy Frog soil, or something like a Roots Organic, stuff like a Strawberry Fields or even an Ocean Forest might have a little bit too much amendments already pre-mixed in, and it might be a little too hot for that seedling. But those other soils should be plenty fine to get going. And then once the plant has gotten going, you can then put it into a more heavily amended soil, and then it could eat properly. But really what I like to do is take the seed, poke down with like the back of a pen and create a small dimple into the soil. The soil should be moist, but not soaking wet. You should be able to squeeze the soil and see barely a drop of water come out. And then when you open your hand, it should stay clumped together. And then you can kind of break it up in between your fingers, and it should break up very easily. It shouldn't clump together and stay really hard. That means that your configuration of soil or how they mix the soil might have too much clay or too much worm castings or some kind of dense matter holding it all together, or it might just be too wet. So I really like to keep an airy kind of soil, kind of keep it really light and able f- able for the roots to kind of just go throughout it very easily. So fill up a cup about 3/4 of the way up, and then make a small dimple with the back of a pen or pencil, and then I'll pour from the shot glass the water because as the seeds are starting to sprout and crack open, they're releasing some enzymes to get the things going, right? So you want to use those enzymes. You could just dump them out onto a paper cloth and then pick them up by a tweezer and put them in. But why not use that water, right? So I dump a little bit of that water in each of the dimples so it has a nice wet spot for where you're going to put the seed. And then I'll take a toothpick or something in order to slide the seed out of the shot glass and let it fall directly into the dimple. Then I'll gently cover it over and spray it a few times with a water bottle and then cover it up with a plastic baggie. So it creates this incubator where it traps in the heat and the moisture so that it has everything it needs for the seed to germinate.
Do
And
you
within 2 to 3, sorry,
do
go ahead.
you want the seed to be positioned a certain way?
So yes and no. A lot of people will say you're going to want the pointed end. When you look at a seed, on one side it'll have almost like a dimple where the seed was attached, and then the other side comes to a point. And a lot of times they say what you want to do is put the point down so that when the seed starts to come up and emerge, it has an easier time shedding the shell and it kind of as it merges through the soil, it'll pull off the seed shell. And that really is, I yes and no. I don't really find it's super super beneficial or like you have to do it. I mean, usually when the seeds are healthy and they're fresh, I mean, you could put them in there any way you want. Those things are going to sprout, you know. Um, if it's an older seed or something you're a little bit worried about, yeah, you could take the extra second or two to position it properly. But as soon as you cover it up and start watering it or whatever, that seed's going to roll around in the dirt probably. It's probably not going to stay completely fixed to how you set it into the soil. So if it's 100% necessary in position, not really, not really. Um, and if it's upside down, sometimes what can happen is that the taproot will emerge and it'll be kind of like growing upside down, which I don't really find happens all too often. That really mostly happens when you plant them too shallow. When you plant a seed too shallow, that can definitely happen. And all you got to do is spin it around, add a little bit more soil, cover up that root, and it should be fine. But really, once it's covered up with the plastic baggie, you're going to want to give it that 2 to 3 days, give it the time for it to emerge. And as soon as it does emerge, you want to check it out. You want to make sure that seed casing did fall off. If that seed casing is still on it, it can be a problem. You want those initial leaves, the starter leaves, to start receiving light as soon as possible. If
So
they're trapped in that seed shell, they could die
so
and
for
dampen
those
off real quick.
so what is the reason for putting the plastic bag over it? And during those 2 3 days, you do want them under the light, correct?
Yes, so for the first 2 to 3 days, you do want that plastic bag on there, and it might not even be 2 to 3 days. It might even be just one day, and it might pop out. All it does is it creates a retention layer for the heat As the light penetrates into the cup, it'll trap the heat from the light in there and create a greenhouse effect where it'll stay very warm. And then also, the moisture will not be able to dry out very quickly if it's covered with a plastic bag. It'll retain that moisture in there and it'll help the seed to stay nice and moist, because if the seed dries out during the germination process, it can also be an issue and have it die off. So you want to keep it moist until it emerges. And then the second it emerges, the main thing you want to be, I'm sorry, what was the other question? Was that, did I cover?
Yeah, you did. Just you want it under the light for those 2-3 days. So as soon as
The
you get it in the
light,
cup,
yeah.
you put it, in the tent with the light ready to go, right?
So the light I run for 24 hours. I want to create this warm environment for the seedling to emerge into. I don't want it shutting off for 6 hours for no reason, and then it gets all cold in the tent that they're in or wherever you have them, and it's messing with it, right? It's all about maintaining the perfect environment for the plant. You want to really set them up for success by giving them what they need when they need it. And when they're in that germination stage, they need almost 100% moisture or 90% humidity, right? You really want it super moist in there so that that shell stays nice and soft and they're able to really slip right out of it. Because if that shell gets really hard and dries out, it could be hard for them to emerge out of there. And what ends up happening is you have to go in there with a pair of tweezers and slightly squeeze it on the side and slowly remove it and play some surgery without ripping off the head. And trust me,
Yeah.
I've ripped off several heads. It has definitely happened. And it is really about just getting that shell off. And the second it comes off, you could see those leaves start to open up and start taking in the energy and really start to open up and show their first true leaves. And
Yeah, I mean that
the
process,
light,
it's really like trying to remove an eggshell off a little baby chicken's head. It is very delicate. You're like, oh man.
super delicate. And when you're running with expensive bird seeds and you can't waste them, and you really want to make sure everyone gets
Bird
through.
seeds.
Yeah, you really want to make sure everyone makes it, especially when you're paying so much for these seeds. So you're gonna want to even remove that shell, but in the other end of that is if you don't remove the shell, they die. So you're gonna want to remove the shell. So if you rip off the head, it's gonna die anyways. I'm always
Yeah,
super
that's
impatient
that's
though.
why that's
You
why
can
ideally you just want the environment to be in a spot for where the natural progression can take place on its own.
Yeah, if you plant it deep enough, and I don't mean go crazy and plant it, you know, 3 inches or 2 inches deep. I'm talking like half an inch. You know what I mean? Half an inch to 3/4 of an inch down, and that should be enough soil between the surface and where you planted it for that shell of the seed to be removed as it sprouts. So that should be more than enough space. And oftentimes they don't just come off. And I've noticed I've popped a lot of seeds and they don't always come off. And it is very important to remove them. And I've played surgery plenty of times. It's definitely worth doing. I've saved tons of plants that shouldn't have made it because they weren't strong enough to emerge from the shell. And those have been some of the winners. At the end of the day, some of the more finicky plants can really produce some amazing flowers. So don't waste any of them. Always give them the best chance for success. And that's really what you're trying to do. Just be a good steward to the plant and really just give it everything it needs and take it where it needs to go. And that's really just what I do to start the plant. And then as soon as it emerges, as soon as that shell's off and it's starting to open those leaves, you remove the plastic bag. And technically that's day one of veg.
What's happening, everybody?
I like to think anybody can grow. It really isn't that hard at all. All the followers on Facebook, everybody who's been participating in the giveaways, it really does mean the world to me.